Hello and welcome to our graduate course on water-based media. I'm Doug Waterfield. I'm going to be your instructor for this. I'm going to approach this from the standpoint that you don't know anything about watercolor. So if I'm repeating things that you already know, just bear with me, because inevitably there will be someone that has not done this or that thing. So if you're ready, we're going to start and we're going to talk about papers. So there are different types of substrates that you can paint watercolor onto, and they all have different qualities. It depends on what you want to do and what makes you happy. There's basically two different types. There's hot press and there's cold press. With the hot press, which is what we have here on the bottom, you get a nice smooth surface. It's good if you want to get good detail work, if you're going to work a long time. And get lots of little tiny finite details. Hot press is the way to go. And then there's cold press, which as you can see is a lot rougher. It depends on what you want to do. I find that cold press works a little better for landscapes and that sort of thing because you can get a lot of nice textures and it has a rough kind of spontaneity to it that I like. But we'll show you some examples of that in just a minute. So among the papers, there are also different weights, and the different weights have to do with the thickness of the paper. I believe this is a 140-pound hot press paper, and it's a lot lighter and it's a lot cheaper. They also make a 300-pound hot press paper that's thicker, but it's also more expensive. And the same goes with cold press papers. There's 140-pound and 300-pound. I think this is 140-pound. The 300-pound is like cardboard. It's just super, super thick. Why would you want one over the other? Cost is one. Also, the heavier paper you get, the less likely it is to buckle once you get it stretched out on your board and you get ready to paint. I like to avoid all that and paint on illustration board or watercolor board. It doesn't warp. I don't have to worry about stretching it. It's probably the most expensive thing that you can paint on, but hey, I'm worth it. So that's what I do. When you get ready to paint, most of the time you're not going to want to paint on a full sheet of watercolor paper, which usually measures 22 by 30. You're going to want to tear it down. So we're going to talk a little bit now about how to tear down the paper. Alright, so now we're going to tear down our sheet and get ready to paint. Why do we tear watercolor paper instead of cutting it on a paper cutter? That's a great question and I'm glad you asked. If you notice, the edge of the paper here has what's called a deckled edge. This is a really rough edge that comes from the manufacturing process. Sometimes that edge is really rough, and then as you see on the other side, it's not as rough. Why is it there? Some people like to float their paintings in a frame instead of matting everything out. They'll just set it on top of a mat so that you can see this kind of rough edge that goes all the way around. It's up to you what you want to do. I rarely, if ever, use the deckled edge, so I am not above just cutting it on the paper cutter or even with a ruler and an X-Acto knife. That'll be fine too. But we're going to assume that you want to have that deckled edge. So this is what we're going to do. First, we're going to measure it to make sure that it fits on the board. Alright, so first we're going to measure it to make sure it's going to fit on the board, and you're probably going to want to use a standard size so that it will fit in a standard frame when you're done. A good size here looks like 17 by 22. We can cut that down to 16 by 20 is a standard frame size, but you'll have to rearrange it on the board. So I'm going to just cut this down to 17 inches this way. And then you make another mark at 17 inches, and then just draw a line between them. Easy breezy. That will be where we tear it. It's just a really light line. Then I want to fold it. That's how we're going to start our tear. So I'll find the first little mark I made down here and I'll fold that. Then I'll find my second mark and I'll fold that there. And I'll try to get it as square as possible as I work it down the spine. I'm trying to get as hard of a crease as I can, because every time I do that it breaks the fibers down and makes it easier to tear. If you find that you're having trouble with it, you can wet that edge just a little bit and that'll soften it up even more. Sometimes I'll run this over a hard edge like that, get that crease really, really tight. Why am I going to so much trouble just to rip a piece of paper? Because this paper is like $8 a sheet and I don't want to have to do it over and over and over again. So I'll take my time and make sure it all rips nicely. Alright, we are ready to go now. So I'm just going to get my ruler, put it back on there. Hopefully, now that I have weakened all of the edges, well, I gooped it up a little bit, but you can go back and fix these little pieces if you want to. There. Now I have my nice deckled edge. I'm ready to go. So before you begin painting at all, you're going to want to stretch your paper. And the reason you stretch it is so that you don't get all those nice little buckles in it. Especially if you use a thinner, less expensive paper, this will eliminate all that. And it's a really easy process. All you do is get your paper laid out, a little water, wipe it all down, get it nice and wet, flip it over, do the same thing, nice and wet. You may end up having to add a little water to your board too, that's all right. And then we'll lay it back down. And it's really super flat. And I'm just gonna squeegee out all that water underneath one more time. All right, now that it's flat on the board, there's two things you can do. You can tape all of these edges so that it is consistently flat. If that's what you want to do, they make a tape especially for that. I like to use clamps, and I'll tell you why. The clamps you can move, and so if you have this sitting here for a while and you notice a bubble starting to form in one of these corners, let's say this corner, I can lift it up, stretch that out, put my clamp back on, and we're good to go. Depending on how you want to work, you can let this completely dry before you start if you want to work wet into dry, or you can start right now, it's good to go, and you can work wet into wet.